The cafeteria of the Galactic Military Academy buzzed with the usual chaos of 1,000 different species trying to coexist. The air recyclers worked overtime to process the varied atmospheric needs of beings from across the known galaxy, creating a constant hum that had become white noise to most cadets. At table 47, tucked away in the corner where shadows gathered like old friends, sat the smallest figure in the entire hall. Zara Shun kept her eyes fixed on her meal tray, methodically eating the standard-issue protein, blocks that tasted like cardboard but provided all necessary nutrients for human physiology. Around her, conversations flowed in dozens of languages, punctuated by the occasional roar of laughter from the Korthek table where the 8-foot-tall reptilian warriors shared stories of their hunting prowess. The crystalline Vexani chimed their musical language while their forms reflected light in prismatic patterns across the walls. Nobody paid attention to the quiet human girl who always sat alone. Well, almost nobody. "Look at the little mouse," rumbled Torgak, a massive Korthek whose scales bore the proud scars of ritual combat from his homeworld. His voice carried easily across the cafeteria, causing several nearby tables to turn and look. Still hiding in her corner like a frightened prey animal. His companions laughed, the sound like rocks grinding together. Vexani crystals chimed in what passed for their version of amusement. Even some of the more civilized species couldn't hide their smirks as they glanced toward Zara's table. Zara's grip tightened slightly on her eating utensil, but she didn't look up. She had learned long ago that drawing attention only made things worse. Better to be invisible, to be forgotten, to let them think she was weak. "I heard she hasn't spoken a word in combat class," added Sulthara, a sleek Veltar whose predatory grace made even walking look like stalking. "Just stands there shaking while everyone else demonstrates their techniques." More laughter rippled through the nearby tables. Zara felt the familiar burn of shame and anger mixing in her chest, but she pushed it down deep where it lived with all the other buried emotions. She finished her meal in silence and stood to leave, her movements careful and measured to avoid drawing any more attention. The academy had seemed like such a dream when the acceptance letter arrived on Earth, the first human accepted into the prestigious Galactic Military Academy in over a century. Her parents had been so proud. The news feeds had called her a symbol of humanity's growing place in galactic society. They hadn't mentioned that she would be the only human among beings who could bench press a hover car or whose natural predatory instincts were honed by millions of years of evolution that humans had never experienced. They hadn't warned her that her quiet nature would be seen as weakness, that her preference for observation over action would mark her as prey in an academy designed to train apex predators. As she walked past Torgak's table, she heard him whisper just loud enough for her to catch, "Humans! No wonder they needed our protection to even reach the stars." Look at her, practically trembling. Zara's step faltered for just a moment, but she continued walking. Behind her, the laughter grew louder. Commander Velinux, a distinguished Korthek veteran whose scales had long since faded to the pale gray of age, watched the interaction from the faculty observation deck above the cafeteria. His four eyes tracked the small human's movement with professional interest. Unlike his younger kinsman below, he had lived long enough to learn that the deadliest predators were often the ones who appeared harmless. "Still defending the mouse, old one?" asked Professor Hixara, a spindly insectoid being whose compound eyes reflected the cafeteria lights like disco balls. "I defend nothing," Velenix replied, his voice carrying the weight of decades of military experience. "I simply observe. There is something about that one that the others do not see. What could there possibly be? She's the bottom of every physical ranking, hasn't scored above average on any tactical simulation, and refuses to engage in combat trials." Velenix's scarred snout twitched in what might have been amusement. "Have you looked at her psychological evaluations? Standard human baselines. Elevated stress responses, social anxiety, introversion. Nothing remarkable. Look deeper." Professor Hixara's antennae twitched with curiosity. But before she could respond, The commander had already turned away, his massive form disappearing into the faculty corridors down in the cafeteria. Zara made her way to the dormitory levels, passing groups of cadets who barely acknowledged her existence. The academy's corridors were designed to accommodate species of vastly different sizes, with adjustable ceiling heights and variable gravity sections. As she entered the human standard zone, she felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. Her room was small but private, one of the few benefits of being the only human in her class year. The walls were covered with star charts and tactical manuals that she studied obsessively, trying to find some edge that might help her survive this place. Her grades were good, excellent even, but in an institution that valued physical prowess and aggressive confidence above all else, academic achievement only went so far. She sat at her desk and opened her personal communication device, staring at the blinking indicator that showed 17 unread messages from her parents. They wanted to know how she was doing, if she was making friends, whether she was living up to the honor of representing humanity at the academy. She couldn't bring herself to tell them the truth. How could she explain that she spent every day fighting not to break, under the weight of 1,000 different ways she didn't belong? How could she describe the constant feeling of being watched, evaluated, and found wanting by beings whose very presence made her feel like a child playing dress-up in adult clothes? Instead, she opened her tactical studies and lost herself in the abstract beauty of military theory. Here, in the realm of strategy and logistics, she could excel. Here, her mind could work the way it was meant to, seeing patterns and possibilities that others missed. Outside her window, the academy's training grounds glowed with the light of various combat exercises. Somewhere out there, her classmates were proving their worth through strength and speed, and natural-born lethality. Tomorrow would be another day of mockery, another day of being invisible until she wasn't, another day of swallowing her pride and pretending their words didn't cut deep. But tonight she studied, and in the quiet corners of her mind, something patient and careful began to plan. The combat simulation arena stretched out like a metallic wasteland, its adaptive holographic projectors already beginning to generate the day's training scenario. Zara stood in formation with her squad, watching as the familiar terrain of urban warfare materialized around them. Buildings rose from the floor, streets carved themselves into existence, and the acrid smell of simulated smoke began to fill the air. Squad 7 was not exactly the Academy's finest unit. Besides Zara, it consisted of Jix, a nervous Veltar who had somehow failed to inherit his species' natural hunting instincts, Aration, a young Vexani whose crystal formation was considered imperfect by his people's standards, and Volume, a Korthak who was small by his species' measures but still stood nearly 7 feet tall. "Another glorious day of embarrassment," muttered Volume, his scales shifting to a dull brown that indicated resigned frustration. "The instructors will probably pair us against Squad 1 again just to watch us fail." Squad 1 was legendary among the cadets. Led by Torgak, it consisted of the Academy's most promising warriors from various species, each one a perfect specimen of their respective evolutionary advantages. They had never lost a simulation. "Maybe today will be different," Arachin chimed hopefully, his crystal structure flickering with optimistic blue tones. Jix's tail twitched nervously. "Different how?" "We're still the squad of misfits. I can't track prey properly, Arachin can't sustain his energy shields. Vol is considered tiny by Korthak standards, and she ... He gestured toward Zara, who was checking her equipment with methodical precision. "She hasn't even fired her weapon in live simulation." It was true. Every exercise, every combat scenario, every tactical drill, Zara had found ways to support her squad without directly engaging enemy forces. She provided tactical analysis, coordinated movement, handled communications, managed supplies. But when it came to actual combat, she seemed to freeze up, leaving her squadmates to handle the fighting. Captain Mordain strode into the arena, his power armor clicking with each step. The veteran warrior bore scars from a dozen real conflicts across the galaxy, and his presence commanded instant respect from even the most arrogant cadets. "Today's scenario," he announced, his voice carrying easily across the arena, Urban pacification. Intelligence suggests enemy forces have taken control of a civilian population center. Your mission is to neutralize the threat while minimizing civilian casualties. Secondary objective is to secure the enemy command structure for intelligence gathering. The holographic environment completed its transformation, creating a maze of buildings, alleyways, and potential ambush points. Scattered throughout the simulation were holographic civilians, their movements unpredictable and requiring careful consideration in any tactical approach. Squad assignments? Captain Mordain continued, consulting his tactical display. Squad 1 will approach from the north. Squad 3 from the east. Squad 7. He paused, his gaze finding their little group. Squad 7 will take the southern approach. High difficulty, multiple civilian concentration points, limited cover. Vol's scales deepened to an almost black-brown. It was clearly a punishment assignment, the kind given to squads expected to fail so that others could learn from their mistakes during the after-action review. As the squads moved to their starting positions, Zara finally spoke, her voice quiet but clear. I have an idea. Her squadmates turned to stare at her in surprise. In 6 months of training, she had rarely initiated tactical discussions, usually just nodding along with whatever plan the others developed. I've been studying this scenario type, she continued, pulling out her datapad and showing them a detailed breakdown of the urban environment. The enemy positions follow a predictable pattern. They always establish overwatch here, here, and here. She pointed to 3 building complexes. Their command post will be in this central building, protected by interlocking fields of fire. Okay, Volume said slowly, but knowing where they are doesn't help us get through their defenses. Squad 1 will probably just punch through with brute force tactics. Squad 3 will use their speed to flank. We don't have those options. We have something better, Zara said, her fingers dancing across her datapad as she pulled up additional information. We have patience. She showed them a detailed timing analysis she had compiled from watching previous squads run similar scenarios. Every squad tries to complete the mission as quickly as possible. They treat it like a race, but the simulation responds to aggression with increased resistance. The faster you move, the more enemies spawn, the more civilians panic and get in your way. Ren's crystals flickered with understanding. You want us to move slowly? I want us to move smart, Zara corrected. The simulation has built-in civilian behavior patterns. If we approach carefully, if we take time to appear non-threatening, the civilians will actually help us. They'll give us information, point out enemy positions, even provide cover. Jix's ears perked up with interest. I've noticed that too. When squads charge in aggressively, the civilians run toward the enemy positions for protection. But if you approach them calmly, they'll trust you, Zara finished. And there's something else. The enemy AI is designed to respond to typical military doctrine. It expects direct assault, flanking maneuvers, standard tactical approaches. It's not programmed to handle psychological warfare. Vol's massive head tilted curiously. What kind of psychological warfare? For the first time since arriving at the academy, Zara smiled. It was not a particularly nice smile, the kind that makes them think they're hunting prey, right up until they realize they're the ones being hunted. The simulation began with the sharp blast of a horn. Across the arena, Squad 1 immediately began their characteristic aggressive advance, their movement visible even from a distance as they bounded between cover points with impressive speed and coordination. Squad 3 split into a classic pincer formation, their members using natural abilities to scale buildings and gain superior positioning. Squad 7 walked. They moved through the simulated streets at a pace that seemed almost casual. Their weapons lowered but ready, their formation loose and non-threatening. When they encountered the first group of civilians, instead of ordering them to clear the area, Zara approached slowly and began speaking in calm, measured tones. We're here to help, she said, her voice carrying none of the aggressive authority that most military personnel used. Can you tell us if you've seen anything unusual in the area? The civilian AI, responding to her non-threatening approach, began providing information. Enemy patrol routes, weapon positions, even the location of a hidden entrance to the command building that wasn't marked on any of the tactical maps. Vol watched in amazement as more civilians approached their squad voluntarily, offering assistance and guidance. In every simulation he had participated in, civilians were obstacles to be avoided or managed. Now they were becoming intelligence assets. Meanwhile, across the arena, the sounds of combat echoed as the other squads engaged enemy forces. Explosions rumbled through the simulated environment as Squad 1 encountered heavy resistance, their aggressive approach triggering the full defensive response of the enemy AI. "Now we wait," Zara said quietly, checking her chronometer. "Let them exhaust their resources fighting the other squads. Let them reveal their positions, use their ammunition, commit their reserves." Her squad mates were beginning to understand. This wasn't just about completing the mission. This was about demonstrating that there were other ways to achieve victory besides brute force and natural predatory advantages. In the observation deck above, Captain Mordain leaned forward with interest as he watched Squad 7's unconventional approach. Beside him, Commander Velinux observed with the satisfaction of someone whose suspicions were being confirmed. "Interesting tactics," Captain Mordain murmured. "Indeed," Commander Velinux replied, "though I suspect this is only the beginning." The simulation had been running for 23 minutes when Squad 7 finally made their move. By that time, the other squads had already engaged the enemy forces multiple times, and the arena echoed with the sounds of sustained combat. Squad 1 had successfully breached the outer perimeter but was pinned down by heavy defensive fire. Squad 3 had lost 2 members to a cleverly placed ambush and was struggling to maintain their momentum. Squad 7 moved through the chaos like ghosts. Zara led them through a route that no other squad would have considered, using intelligence gathered from the civilian AI to navigate service tunnels and maintenance corridors that bypassed the main defensive positions entirely. Her squad mates followed her lead with growing confidence, beginning to understand that her months of apparent weakness had actually been careful observation and planning. "Enemy patrol 50 meters ahead," Jix whispered, his enhanced hearing picking up movement that the others couldn't detect. Despite his supposed deficiencies as a Veltar, his sensory abilities were still far superior to most species. "How many?" Zara asked, already pulling up the tactical display on her datapad. 3, standard patrol pattern. They'll pass our position in about 90 seconds. Instead of preparing for combat like every other squad would have done, Zara studied the patrol route and timing. "Arishan, can you create a minor structural shift in that wall? Nothing dramatic, just enough to block their line of sight to Corridor Junction 7? The young Vexani-S crystals flickered with concentration as he channeled energy into the building's structure. Unlike his peers who could maintain massive energy shields for extended periods, Ren's talents lay in precise, subtle manipulations that his people considered practically worthless. The wall shifted slightly, creating a blind spot that would last just long enough for Squad 7 to pass through undetected. They slipped past the patrol without incident, continuing their methodical advance toward the objective. Behind them, the sounds of combat grew more intense as the other squads fought their way through increasingly desperate enemy resistance. "This doesn't feel right," Vol muttered as they moved through another empty corridor. "Where are all the enemies? Shouldn't we be fighting someone by now?" "We are fighting," Zara replied quietly. "We're fighting smarter." She led them to a maintenance shaft that provided direct access to the building where enemy command had been established. According to the intelligence gathered from the civilians, this route would bring them up directly behind the command center, avoiding all the defensive positions that had been established to repel direct assault. As they climbed through the shaft, they could hear the enemy forces above them coordinating their response to the attacks from the other squads. Radio chatter filtered down through the ventilation system, allowing them to track enemy positions and movement in real time. "Squad 1 has breached the main lobby," came one transmission. "Redirect teams 4 and 6 to reinforce the second-floor defensive line. Squad 3 is attempting to scale the eastern wall." Deploy counter-climbing measures and concentrate. Fire on their advanced positions. What the enemy commanders didn't realize was that their communications were being monitored by a squad they had never even detected. Zara listened carefully to each transmission, building a complete picture of enemy disposition and response patterns. "They've committed everyone to stopping the other squads," she whispered to her team. "Command center should be practically empty now." They emerged from the maintenance shaft into a utility closet on the 5th floor of the command building. Through the door they could hear minimal activity in the corridors beyond. The enemy had indeed stripped their command center of most defensive forces to deal with the direct assaults from the other squads. "Scanning for remaining hostiles," Jix reported, his enhanced senses probing the environment around them. 2 guards at the main command center entrance. 1 technical specialist inside the command room. That's it. 3 against 4, Volume noted, his confidence building. "Those are good odds." "Better than good," Zara said, checking her equipment one final time. "Because they don't know we're here." She opened the door slowly, peering out into the corridor beyond. The command center was exactly where the civilians had said it would be, its position marked by heavy blast doors and the soft glow of electronic equipment visible through reinforced windows. The 2 guards stood at attention beside the entrance, their weapons ready, but their attention focused on the sounds of combat filtering up from the lower floors. They were expecting threats to come from below, from the obvious approach routes that every other squad had used. They were not expecting a threat to emerge from a utility closet behind them. Squad 7 moved with a coordination that their months of poor performance had never suggested they possessed. Vol, despite being small for a Korthuk, was still capable of moving with devastating speed when needed. Jix, though lacking his species' natural hunting prowess, could still move with the silent grace that all Veltar possessed. Ren's energy manipulation, while weak by Vixani standards, was more than sufficient to disable electronic systems. The guards were neutralized before they could raise an alarm inside the command center. The lone technician looked up from his displays just in time to see 4 cadets entering through the door he had thought was securely locked. His hand moved toward the emergency alert system, but Vol's massive form was already crossing the room with surprising speed. "Mission accomplished," Zara said quietly into her communication device as Volume secured the technician. "Objective secured, command structure intact for intelligence gathering, 0 civilian casualties." The silence that followed her transmission was profound. Down in the arena below, Squad 1 was still fighting their way through enemy defensive positions, their aggressive assault having triggered waves of reinforcements that seemed to multiply with every floor they advanced. Squad 3 had regrouped and was attempting a second flanking maneuver, but their reduced numbers made progress slow and costly. In the observation deck, Captain Mordain stared at his tactical display in disbelief. According to his sensors, Squad 7 had somehow materialized inside the enemy command center without engaging a single defensive position along the way. "How?" he asked, turning to Commander Velenux. The old Korthek's scarred features might have been carved from stone. "They stopped trying to fight like predators and started thinking like prey. I don't understand. Predators are direct. They rely on strength, speed, natural advantages. They announce their presence and overwhelm opposition through superior force." Velenux gestured toward the display showing Squad 1's continuing assault. "Effective, certainly, but predictable." He switched the display to show Squad 7's route through the simulation. "Prey animals, however, survive through different means: patience, observation, finding paths that predators would never consider because they require subtlety instead of strength." "Captain." Mordain studied the tactical breakdown in growing amazement. Squad 7 had essentially turned the entire simulation into an elaborate trap, using the enemy's own responses against the other squads to strip away their defensive capabilities. "The little human," he said slowly. "She's been learning." "Oh, I suspect she's been learning much more than any of us realized," Commander Velenux replied. "The question now is what she plans to do with that knowledge." Down in the simulation arena, Zara stood in the enemy command center and allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. Her squadmates looked at her with new respect, finally beginning to understand that their months of poor performance had not been due to any lack of capability. Outside, the sounds of combat continued as the other squads fought their way through challenges that Squad 7 had simply stepped around. For the first time since arriving at the academy, Zara felt like she belonged here. The academy's debriefing hall had never been so quiet. 300 cadets sat in stunned silence as the tactical replay showed Squad 7's unconventional approach to what everyone had assumed would be another routine demonstration of Squad 1's superiority. The holographic display rotated slowly, highlighting each decision point where Zara's squad had chosen patience over aggression, subtlety over force. Captain Mordain stood at the front of the hall, his expression unreadable as he reviewed the mission parameters one final time. Squad 7 achieved all primary and secondary objectives in 26 minutes with 0 casualties, 0 collateral damage, and complete operational security. Enemy command structure was captured intact with valuable intelligence assets preserved. He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the assembled cadets. Squad 1 achieved primary objective completion in 41 minutes with significant casualties, moderate collateral damage, and enemy command structure destroyed during final assault, eliminating intelligence value. Torgak's massive frame seemed to shrink into his chair. Around him, his squad mates stared at their hands or the floor, unable to meet the eyes of their peers. Squad 1 had never failed to achieve the best results in any simulation. The idea that they had been not just beaten, but thoroughly outmaneuvered by the academies. Most ridiculed Squad was almost incomprehensible. Squad 3 achieved partial objective completion in 38 minutes with heavy casualties, Captain Mordain continued. Mission parameters required termination due to unacceptable civilian casualty projections. The silence stretched on as cadets tried to process what they had witnessed. Many of them had watched Squad 7 bumble through previous exercises, had laughed at their apparent inability to function as a proper military unit. The revelation that their failures had been carefully orchestrated learning experiences was difficult to accept. "Cadet Chun," Captain Mordain called out, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Front and center. Zara rose from her seat and walked to the front of the hall, her movements steady despite the hundreds of eyes tracking her progress. She had spent so many months trying to be invisible that being the center of attention felt surreal. "Explain your tactical reasoning," Captain Mordain commanded. Zara took a breath, organizing her thoughts. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly through the hall's acoustic systems. Most military doctrine focuses on applying superior force to overwhelm enemy positions. This approach works when you have advantages in numbers, technology, or natural capabilities. When you don't have those advantages, you need different strategies. She gestured toward the tactical display, which showed the routes taken by all 3 squads. Squad 1 relied on their natural physical superiority and aggressive tactics. Squad 3 used speed and coordination. Both approaches are valid when you can absorb casualties and maintain momentum through direct force application. "And your approach?" Captain Mordain prompted. "Information warfare combined with environmental manipulation," Zara replied. "Instead of fighting the enemy's strengths, we turned their defensive preparations into weaknesses. Every resource they committed to stopping the direct assaults was a resource unavailable to protect against infiltration." She walked to the holographic display and began highlighting specific decision points. The civilian population became an intelligence network instead of an obstacle. The enemy's communication systems became a real-time intelligence feed instead of a coordination tool. Their defensive positions became traps for their own forces instead of protection for their assets. Commander Velinux stepped forward from his position near the back of the hall. "And how long have you been planning this demonstration, cadet?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Zara met his gaze steadily, understanding that this was the moment everything would change. "Since the first day of classes, sir." A murmur rippled through the assembled cadets. The implications of her answer were staggering. 6 months of apparent failure, 6 months of being dismissed as weak and incompetent. All as preparation for this single demonstration. You allowed your squad to fail repeatedly, Linux continued, his tone carrying both respect and a hint of accusation. You accepted ridicule and dismissal. Why? Because success would have revealed our capabilities too early, Zara replied. Every species here has natural advantages that humans lack. Physical strength, enhanced senses, specialized abilities that millions of years of evolution have perfected. The only advantage humans have ever possessed is the ability to think differently. She turned to face the assembled cadets, her quiet voice somehow commanding their complete attention. Predators think like predators. They see prey as something to be hunted, cornered, overwhelmed. They don't expect prey to hunt back. Torgak rose from his seat, his massive form radiating indignation. You think you hunted us? You ran and hid like a coward while we fought. Zara's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes that made several cadets unconsciously shift in their seats. I observed. I learned. I identified your patterns, your instincts, your predictable responses. When the time came to act, I knew exactly how you would behave because you had taught me. She gestured toward the tactical display again. Your assault on the main entrance was textbook Korthek doctrine. Aggressive, direct, overwhelming. Sothara-S flanking maneuver followed classic Veltar hunting patterns. Every action you took was exactly what your evolutionary programming told you to do. And what did your evolutionary programming tell you to do? Captain Mordain asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. To survive? Zara replied simply. Humans are pursuit predators. We don't rely on strength or speed to catch our prey. We rely on endurance, planning, and the ability to think beyond our immediate instincts. We follow our prey until it exhausts itself, then we take it down when it can no longer resist. The hall was so quiet that the hum of the life support system seemed deafeningly loud. Cadets who had spent months dismissing the quiet human girl were beginning to realize that they had been observed, studied, and catalogued with the same methodical precision that a researcher might use to document the behavior patterns of laboratory specimens. You used us, whispered Jix, his enhanced hearing picking up conversations from across the hall. All of us. We were your research subjects. You were my teachers, Zara corrected. Every laugh, every mockery, every dismissive comment taught me something valuable about how you think, how you react, how you can be manipulated. Vol stood up from his position near the back of Squad 7's seating area. Despite being the smallest Korthak in the academy, his presence still commanded attention when he chose to use it. What about us? Your own squad? Did you manipulate us too? The question carried weight beyond its simple words. The 3 cadets of Squad 7 had developed genuine respect and affection for their quiet, human squadmate over the months of training. The possibility that their friendship had been calculated manipulation was devastating. Zara looked at each of her squadmates in turn, her expression softening slightly. I needed teammates who understood what it felt like to be underestimated. I needed people who were willing to think differently because the conventional approaches had never worked for them. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I didn't manipulate your abilities. I helped you find ways to use them effectively. Jix, your sensory capabilities are remarkable when applied to reconnaissance instead of direct hunting. Aration, your precise energy manipulation is perfect for subtle operations that require finesse rather than raw power. Vol, your size means you can move through spaces that larger Korthak cannot access. You turned our weaknesses into strengths, Aration said, his crystal structure flickering with understanding. I helped you recognize that they were never weaknesses in the first place, Zara replied. They were just different approaches to the same problems. Commander Velenuk stepped forward again, his ancient eyes studying Zara with new interest. And now that you have demonstrated these capabilities, what do you intend to do? The question carried implications that extended far beyond the academy walls. Military doctrine across the galaxy was based on the natural advantages of various species. The idea that those advantages could be systematically countered by careful observation and planning was revolutionary. Zara met his gaze without flinching. "I intend to graduate, sir. And then I intend to show the galaxy that humans belong among the stars." The silence that followed her declaration was different from the stunned quiet that had preceded it. This was the silence of predators who had suddenly realized that they were no longer the apex species in the room. The Academy's combat arena had been reconfigured for individual trials, its adaptive surfaces creating a maze of obstacles, cover points, and tactical challenges designed to test every aspect of a cadet's military capabilities. Today marked the beginning of final qualification exercises, where each cadet would face a series of increasingly difficult scenarios designed to push them to their absolute limits. Word had spread quickly through the Academy about Squad 7's unprecedented victory in the urban warfare simulation. In the 3 weeks since that demonstration, the social dynamics among the cadets had shifted dramatically. Conversations stopped when Zara passed by, not out of dismissal this time, but from a mixture of curiosity, respect, and for some, genuine fear. The quiet human girl who had been invisible for so long was now watched constantly, studied, analyzed. Every interaction was scrutinized for hidden meaning, every casual comment examined for tactical implications. It was exactly the kind of attention she had spent months trying to avoid. "Today's trial will be different," announced Instructor Kralvin, a battle-scarred Veltar whose reputation for brutal training methods was legendary among the cadets. "Instead of squad-based operations, you will face individual challenges designed to test your personal combat capabilities." The instructor's predatory gaze swept across the assembled cadets. "Each of you will enter the arena alone and face 3 sequential challenges. Failure in any challenge results in immediate termination from the Academy program." A collective tension filled the air. Final qualification trials had a 30% failure rate, and those who failed were not offered second chances. For many cadets, this represented their only opportunity to earn a place in the galactic military hierarchy. "The challenges are as follows," Kralvin continued. "First, direct combat against automated defense systems. Second, tactical problem-solving under extreme time pressure. Third, psychological evaluation under simulated torture conditions." Val's scales shifted to a nervous gray-green. "Psychological evaluation under torture? That's not usually part of qualification trials." "They're testing more than just our combat abilities," Jix whispered, his enhanced hearing picking up fragments of conversation from the instructor platform. "They want to see how we handle pressure when our usual advantages are stripped away?" Ren's crystal structure flickered with anxiety. "After what happened with our squad, they probably want to understand human tactical thinking better." The implications were clear. Zara's demonstration had not just impressed the Academy instructors. It had concerned them. The idea that human psychological warfare could be used to systematically counter the natural advantages of other species was strategically significant on a galactic scale. "Cadet Torgak?" Instructor Kralvin called out. "You will proceed first." The massive Korthek strode into the arena with the confidence of someone who had never seriously doubted his own capabilities. The first challenge materialized around him, a series of automated turrets with overlapping fields of fire. Designed to test raw combat ability under direct assault conditions, Torgak's approach was exactly what everyone expected. He charged directly at the nearest turret, using his natural speed and armor-like scales to absorb incoming fire while closing distance. His massive claws tore through the automated defenses with devastating efficiency, destroying each target through sheer physical superiority. The watching cadets nodded approvingly. It was a textbook demonstration of Korthak combat doctrine: identify the enemy, close distance, apply overwhelming force. The second challenge appeared, a complex tactical puzzle, requiring the coordination of multiple systems to prevent a simulated reactor overload. Torgak attacked this problem with the same direct approach, his powerful hands working at control panels. With surprising dexterity for someone of his size, he completed the challenge in acceptable time. though his solution was somewhat crude compared to what a more technically oriented species might have achieved. The third challenge, however, proved more difficult. Simulated interrogation scenarios designed to break psychological resistance were not something that could be overcome through physical strength alone. The Academy's psychological warfare programs were sophisticated, targeting specific mental vulnerabilities that varied by species. Torgak emerged from the arena after 43 minutes, his massive form showing signs of strain that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. His scales had shifted to colors that indicated deep psychological discomfort, and his movements lacked their usual predatory confidence. "Qualified," Instructor Kralvin announced. Though his tone suggested the margin had been narrow, several more cadets followed, each demonstrating the expected approaches for their respective species. Veltar cadets relied on speed and agility. Vexani candidates used energy manipulation and technical expertise. Korthak after Korthak charged directly through the challenges, succeeding or failing based largely on the raw power they could bring to bear. By the time Zara's name was called, a pattern had emerged. The challenges were designed to test conventional military thinking, rewarding candidates who applied their species' natural advantages in predictable ways. "Cadet Chun," Instructor Kralvin announced, his voice carrying across the arena. "Enter and begin." Zara walked into the arena with the same measured pace she had maintained for months. Her equipment standard issue, her demeanor calm and unremarkable. The watching cadets leaned forward with anticipation, wondering what unconventional approach she would take. The first challenge materialized, the same automated turret system that had faced every previous cadet. Overlapping fields of fire, multiple targets, designed to reward aggressive assault tactics or superior agility instead of charging toward the turrets, or attempting to outmaneuver their targeting systems. Zara simply stood in the center of the arena and began to observe, for 30 seconds. She remained motionless while the turrets tracked her position, their targeting systems locked onto her but not yet firing. The watching cadets began to murmur with confusion. Was she frozen with fear? Had the pressure finally broken her psychological composure? Then she moved, but not in any direction that made tactical sense. Instead of seeking cover or closing distance with the nearest target, she walked directly toward what appeared to be the most heavily defended position in the arena. The turrets opened fire, their energy bolts converging on her position. But Zara was no longer where their targeting systems expected her to be. She had analyzed their firing patterns, identified the brief gaps in coverage that occurred when they switched between targets, and moved through those gaps with inhuman precision. What looked like suicide to the watching cadets was actually the safest path through the defensive grid. By walking directly into what appeared to be the most dangerous area, she had found the one route that the turret's programming hadn't anticipated. She reached the central control node and deactivated the entire system with a single touch, completing the challenge in less than 2 minutes without firing a shot. The arena fell silent as the implications of what they had witnessed began to sink in. Zara had not just avoided the turret's fire. She had turned their own defensive programming into a pathway to victory. The second challenge appeared, the same tactical puzzle that had tested the previous cadets' technical abilities. Multiple systems, time pressure, complex interactions that required quick thinking and technical expertise. Zara approached the control panels and began working. But her methodology was completely different from anything the previous cadets had attempted. Instead of trying to solve the puzzle through technical manipulation, she began to systematically induce controlled failures in non-critical systems. To the watching instructors, it appeared that she was sabotaging her own chances of success. The tactical display showed multiple system failures cascading through the simulation as she deliberately triggered one malfunction after another. Then, with less than 30 seconds remaining, the purpose of her approach became clear. The controlled failures had created a simplified system state where the solution became trivial instead of complex. Instead of managing dozens of interacting variables, she now only needed to activate 3 primary controls in sequence. Challenge completed with 16 seconds to spare. Commander, Valinux leaned forward in the observation deck, his ancient eyes studying every detail of Zara's performance. "Fascinating," he murmured. "She's not solving the problems at all." "What do you mean?" asked Captain Mordain. "She's redefining them. Instead of accepting the challenges as presented, she's finding ways to change the fundamental parameters until the solutions become obvious." The third challenge materialized around Zara: psychological evaluation under simulated torture conditions. This was the test that had broken some cadets completely. The brutal assessment of mental resilience that determined whether someone could withstand the psychological pressures of real military conflict. But as the simulation began, something unprecedented happened. Instead of enduring the psychological assault, instead of trying to resist the carefully crafted mental attacks designed to break her will, Zara began to analyze them. She treated the simulated interrogation like a research opportunity, observing the techniques being used. The Academy's highest conference room had never hosted a meeting quite like this one. Representatives from 12 different species sat around a circular table designed to accommodate the vast physiological differences between galactic civilizations. The emergency session had been called 48 hours after the completion of final qualification trials, and the agenda contained only a single item: the human question. Fleet Admiral Vexara, a distinguished Vexani whose crystal structure bore the deep purple hues of extreme age and wisdom, activated the central holographic display. Tactical analyses, psychological profiles, and combat performance data filled the space above the table, all centered on a single cadet whose quiet demeanor masked capabilities that had begun to concern some of the galaxy's most senior military leadership. "The data is unprecedented," Admiral Vexara began, her crystalline voice carrying harmonics that indicated deep concern. "In 6 months of observation, Cadet Chun has demonstrated tactical thinking that operates on fundamentally different principles from any military doctrine in our databases. General Kordak, the massive Korthek representative whose battle scars told the story of a lifetime of military service, gestured dismissively toward the display. One cadet's unusual performance hardly justifies this level of concern. Exceptional individuals appear in every generation." "Exceptional, yes," replied Commander Valinux from his position across the table. "But not unprecedented. The concern is not what she has accomplished, but how she thinks about accomplishing it." He manipulated the holographic controls, highlighting specific sections of Zara's performance data. Traditional military thinking follows predictable patterns. Identify enemy capabilities, assess your own resources, develop tactics that leverage your advantages against their weaknesses. Every species in this room has developed military doctrine based on these fundamental principles. The display shifted to show comparative analyses of various species' combat methodologies: Korthek aggression, Veltar speed tactics, Vexani energy manipulation, each approach optimized around natural evolutionary advantages. "Human military thinking appears to operate differently," Valinux continued. "Instead of leveraging advantages, they focus on exploiting psychological and systemic weaknesses. Instead of applying superior force, they manipulate the decision-making processes of their opponents." Admiral Vexara's crystal structure flickered with patterns that indicated deep contemplation. "You are suggesting that human warfare is fundamentally psychological rather than physical." "I'm suggesting that human warfare treats the enemy's mind as the primary battlefield," Valinux corrected. "Physical conflict becomes secondary to controlling how the opponent thinks about the conflict." Dr. Hixara, the Academy's chief psychological analyst, activated her own section of the display. "We've conducted extensive analysis of Cadet Chun's psychological profile. What we've discovered is disturbing. The data that appeared showed brain scans, cognitive assessments, and behavioral analyses that painted a picture unlike anything in their extensive databases of galactic psychology. Human cognitive architecture appears uniquely suited for what we might term metatactical thinking," Dr. Hixara explained. "While other species excel at direct tactical problem-solving, Humans demonstrate an unusual capacity for analyzing the thought processes behind tactical decisions. General Kordak's scales shifted to colors indicating growing irritation. You're describing strategic thinking. That's hardly unique to humans. Not strategic thinking, Dr. Hiksara corrected. Psychological warfare. Cadet Chun doesn't just plan tactics. She models the psychological state of her opponents and uses that modeling to predict and manipulate their decision-making processes. She highlighted a specific section of data that showed Zara's performance during the urban warfare simulation. Notice how she spent the first months deliberately demonstrating weakness. This wasn't defensive behavior. It was intelligence gathering. She was teaching her opponents to think of her as harmless so that their natural psychological responses would work against them when she finally acted. The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Every representative around the table belonged to species that had evolved as predators of one form or another. The idea that they could be psychologically manipulated by what they perceived as prey was fundamentally disturbing. You're suggesting that she spent 6 months conducting psychological warfare experiments on her classmates, Admiral Hiksara said slowly, using the academy itself as a laboratory for studying galactic military psychology. That is exactly what I'm suggesting, Dr. Hiksara confirmed. And based on her results, she's developed tactical approaches that could potentially neutralize the natural advantages of any species we've studied. The conference room fell silent as the assembled military leaders contemplated the strategic implications. If human psychological warfare techniques could be systematized and taught to other humans, the entire balance of galactic military power could shift. Commander Valinux leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. There's something else to consider. We've been assuming that Cadet Chun is exceptional among her species. But what if she isn't? Explain, Admiral Hiksara requested. What if this type of thinking is normal for humans? What if we've been fundamentally misunderstanding their species' capabilities? He activated another section of the display, showing historical data on human military conflicts from their homeworld. Look at their warfare patterns. Humans have consistently defeated opponents with superior physical capabilities through tactical approaches that other species would. Are unconventional. The data showed centuries of human military history, from ancient battles where smaller forces defeated larger ones through superior psychological manipulation, to modern conflicts where technological disadvantages were overcome through innovative tactical thinking. They've been using these techniques against each other for millennia, Valinux continued. What we're seeing at the Academy may not be the development of new capabilities, but the application of existing human military doctrine to galactic warfare. General Kordak's massive form seemed to shrink slightly as the full implications became clear. You're saying that humans have been studying us while we've been dismissing them. I'm saying that humans approach warfare the way researchers approach laboratory subjects, Valinux replied. They observe, analyze, identify patterns, then exploit those patterns to achieve victory regardless of their physical disadvantages. Dr. Hiksara nodded in agreement. Cadet Chin's psychological profile suggests that she views every interaction as a potential source of tactical intelligence. She's not just attending the academy. She's conducting a comprehensive study of galactic military psychology. The conference room's atmospheric systems worked overtime to process the varied breathing requirements of 12 different species, but the tension in the air was thick enough to taste regardless of atmospheric composition. Admiral Hiksara's crystal structure pulsed with slow, deliberate patterns as she processed the information. Recommendations? We need to understand the full scope of human capabilities before they become a strategic threat, General Kordak stated bluntly. If their entire species thinks like this cadet, we could be facing a fundamental shift in galactic military dynamics. Agreed, said Commander Valinux, but I recommend a different approach. Instead of treating humans as a potential threat, We should consider them as a potential strategic asset. He gestured toward Zara's performance data. Cadet Chun's techniques are effective precisely because they exploit weaknesses in our own tactical thinking. If we can understand and adapt to human military psychology, it could make our own forces significantly more effective. You want to learn from them, Admiral Dexara observed. I want to determine whether cooperation is possible, Velenox clarified. Because if it isn't, if humans view all other species as subjects for psychological manipulation rather than potential allies, then we're going to have a much larger problem than one exceptional cadet. The meeting continued for several hours, but the fundamental question remained unanswered. Were humans potential partners in galactic civilization, or were they apex predators who viewed every other species as prey to be studied, understood, and ultimately controlled? The answer, they all knew, lay in understanding what Zara Chun would do next. In her dormitory room several levels below. Zara sat at her desk reviewing tactical manuals and preparing for graduation exercises, completely unaware that her quiet demonstrations of human ingenuity were causing existential concerns among the galaxy's most senior military leadership. She was, however, beginning to plan her next move. Graduation day at the Galactic Military Academy was traditionally a celebration of achievement, a formal recognition of the new officers who would soon take their places in the complex hierarchy of galactic defense. This year, however, the ceremony carried an undercurrent of tension that had nothing to do with normal pre-deployment anxiety. The Great Assembly Hall accommodated thousands of beings from across the galaxy, its adaptive architecture shifting to provide optimal viewing conditions for dozens of different species. Proud families occupied the civilian sections, while military dignitaries filled the official observer areas. At the center of it all, 237 new graduates stood in formation, ready to receive their commissions. Zara stood with Squad 7 near the back of the formation, her dress uniform crisp and precisely fitted. Beside her, her squad mates wore expressions of pride mixed with anticipation for their coming assignments. The months since the final trials had been filled with advanced tactical courses, leadership seminars, and specialized training designed to prepare them for real military service. For Zara, those months had provided something even more valuable: additional opportunities to observe and analyze the command structure she would soon be joining, Fleet. Admiral Dexara took the podium, her ancient crystal structure resonating with harmonics that carried clearly through the hall's acoustic systems. Today marks the transition from cadet to officer, from student to guardian of galactic civilization. Each of you has demonstrated the capabilities necessary to serve in the most elite military organization in known space. The traditional words carried weight, but Zara noticed subtle changes in the usual ceremony protocol. Additional security personnel were stationed throughout the hall, and several senior commanders maintained positions that suggested they were more concerned with observation than celebration. This year's graduating class has distinguished itself through exceptional performance in multiple areas, Admiral Dexara continued. However, one demonstration stands out as particularly noteworthy. The holographic displays around the hall activated, showing the tactical replay of Squad 7's urban warfare simulation. Murmurs rippled through the assembled crowd as they watched the unconventional approach that had redefined everyone's understanding of military possibilities. "Cadet Chun," Admiral Dexara called out. Front and center. Zara stepped forward and marched to the front of the formation, her movements precise and measured. Behind her, she could feel hundreds of eyes tracking her progress, analyzing every detail of her demeanor for signs of the capabilities. That had become the subject of so much speculation. Your approach to military problem-solving has provided valuable insights into alternative tactical methodologies, Admiral Dexara stated formally. The Academy recognizes exceptional achievement in the field of psychological warfare and strategic innovation. She paused, and in that pause, Zara heard something that others might have missed. The Admiral's crystalline voice carried harmonic undertones that indicated uncertainty, even concern. Your commission has been approved for immediate assignment to the Strategic Planning Division, with additional duties in the Psychological Warfare Research Department. It was a significant honor. Graduates were typically assigned to standard military units for their initial service periods. Direct placement in strategic planning was reserved for the most exceptional candidates. It was also, Zara realized, a way to keep her under close observation while utilizing her capabilities for galactic defense purposes. "Thank you, Admiral," Zara replied, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. "I look forward to serving the galactic community in whatever capacity best utilizes my abilities." As she returned to formation, Zara noticed the subtle shift in body language among the senior officers present. Relief, perhaps, that she had accepted the assignment gracefully, or possibly continued wariness about what she might accomplish in a position with access to classified strategic information. The ceremony continued with individual recognitions and the formal presentation of commissions, but Zara's mind was already working on the implications of her assignment. Strategic planning would provide unprecedented access to galactic military doctrine, command structures, and defensive protocols. From an intelligence-gathering perspective, it was the ideal position for someone interested in understanding how the galaxy's various species approach military coordination on a macro scale. After the formal ceremony concluded, Zara found herself approached by Commander Villenux, whose scarred features bore an expression of professional curiosity mixed with something that might have been paternal concern. "Congratulations on your commission, Lieutenant Chun," he said formally. "Your assignment should provide significant opportunities for professional growth." "Thank you, sir," Zara replied. "I'm looking forward to contributing to galactic defense efforts." Villenux studied her for a moment, his ancient eyes weighing words carefully. "A word of advice from an old soldier?" "Of course, sir." "Power is a tool that reveals character rather than creating it," he said quietly. "The position you're entering will provide you with access to information and influence that could be used in many different ways. How you choose to use them will determine not just your own future, but potentially the future relationship between humanity and the rest of galactic civilization." The warning was subtle but clear. Zara's capabilities had been recognized, but they had also generated concern about human intentions on a galactic scale. "I understand, sir," Zara replied. "Humanity's goal has always been to find our place among the stars as contributors to galactic civilization, not as conquerors of it." "I hope that's true," Villenux said. "For all our sakes." As the commander moved away, Zara was approached by her squad mates, their expressions showing the complex mixture of pride and concern that had characterized their relationship since the urban warfare demonstration. "So," Volume said, his massive form somehow managing to convey nervous energy, "strategic planning. That's quite an assignment for a new graduate." "It's an opportunity to make a real difference," Zara replied, maintaining the careful balance between confidence and humility that had served her well throughout her academy training. "Just remember us little people when you're running the galaxy," Jix added with a nervous laugh. "Nobody runs the galaxy," Zara said seriously. "That's the point. It's too complex for any single authority to control effectively. Success requires cooperation, understanding, and the ability to find solutions that work for everyone involved." Ren's crystal structure flickered with curiosity. "Is that what you've been working toward all along? Finding ways to help different species work together more effectively?" It was a perceptive question, and Zara considered her answer carefully. "I've been working toward understanding how different minds approach the same problems. If you understand how someone thinks, you can find ways to communicate with them that make cooperation possible." "And if they don't want to cooperate?" Vol asked. For just a moment, Zara's expression changed, revealing a glimpse of something that made all three of her squad mates unconsciously step back slightly. "Then you help them understand why cooperation is in their best interests," she said quietly. The moment passed, and her usual composed demeanor returned, but the message had been received. Humanity's quiet representative at the Galactic Military Academy had demonstrated that there were many different ways to achieve victory, and not all of them involved traditional concepts of force. As the graduation celebration continued around them, Zara excused herself and walked to one of the Academy's observation decks, where she could look out at the stars through the massive transparent barriers that protected the station from the vacuum of space. Somewhere among those countless points of light was Earth, the small blue world where humanity had learned to survive through cooperation, ingenuity, and the ability to adapt to challenges that physical strength alone couldn't overcome. The galaxy was about to learn what humans could accomplish when those same principles were applied on an interstellar scale. Behind her, the celebration continued, but Zara's attention was already focused on the future, on the vast network of civilizations that she would soon have the opportunity to study, understand, and ultimately help guide toward a more stable and cooperative galactic community. The shy girl who had been mocked for her weakness was gone. In her place stood Lieutenant Zara Chun, Strategic Planning Division, Galactic Military Academy, ready to show the galaxy that humanity's greatest strength had never been physical power. It had always been the ability to turn any situation into an opportunity for victory.